things started to shift for me in 2016, the summer of 2016, which sounds like a long time ago. But I just didn't have the zest for plein air painting. I went out as usual, and there was something missing. I wasn't interested in it, and I labored over it, and most of the work that I did that summer was unfinished and unresolved. And I was pretty worried about it. I wasn't really sure what was happening. And at the end of the summer, I brought the unfinished paintings to my studio, and I started putzing around with them, trying to finish them. And then around November of 2016, I just went up to the studio one day, and I just hated them all. I hated everything, and I just didn't want to paint on them. It didn't interest me whatsoever, so I didn't paint for almost a month. And then, I started thinking, well, what am I going to do now? So I have to figure something out. So I just kept going to the studio anyway, which is a really good lesson for any of you artists if you run into this problem. I just kept showing up. Sometimes I'd just read. Sometimes I would take naps. Sometimes I'd look at Instagram, but I never did any artwork. And then after a few weeks of that, I decided I would just clean up my studio. So I started going through all my piles of stuff that I hadn't touched in years and years. And I came across all this, acrylic, fluid acrylics, colored inks, pastels, crayons, all this stuff I hadn't touched in years and years. Rice paper. And I just thought, well, let me just start playing with that. So I just started putzing around with that and making, just seeing how they reacted to each other, like pouring ink on top of crayon marks and making acrylic marks and rubbing that, making marks into it and printing on it with different textures. And then I was just like so enamored and excited that I hardly even slept for a month. I just couldn't get out of the studio then. So I just kept working and working like that. And this work here, the black one, large black one there on the left, was from that period. It's on Yupo, and it's got acrylic, colored inks, graphite, all kinds of stuff on it. And so I was just happy as a clam. I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going, but I was just happy to be making something again. And then April came along, and gallery season was going to start, and I didn't have any paintings to bring to the gallery. And so I was pretty nervous about that because I didn't want to lose my space here. It's such a great gallery, and I didn't want to blindside Karen and Mike with all this work on paper that they had no idea I was working on, that didn't go with anything that I'd ever done. So I quickly pulled myself together and finished some paintings and brought them in. And they were okay, but they were tentative. There was a lot of self-consciousness in them. You could tell I just didn't have my heart in them. But they took them, thank goodness. And I pressed on. I painted outdoors most of that summer. And then in September, I went to China to visit my son, and I was there for 3 weeks. And we visited the Yunnan province, which is the southwest province. We were at the foot of the Himalayas. And, some of the villages there dated back to the 18th century. And the texture and the color was just so mesmerizing. And all I could see the whole time I was there was getting back to, the more organic kind of work that I was doing. So I came back from that all energized, but I also had to prepare for a month-long residency in November at Weir Farm in Connecticut. And I had put in a proposal to get that residency to do a body of work celebrating trees. And I just decided, forget it, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to try to develop this mixed media work, see if I can get anywhere with it and creating a body of work, and see how it might impact my painting. So I got there 1st of November. Oh, in October, just to prepare for that, I started doing this little mixed media sketchbook, and I can pass this around. And this is where I experimented with all kinds of stuff. I mean, I just tried combining any old thing to see what would happen. And a lot of them are not very good. I mean, they're not resolved in any way, but it informed me about what I might incorporate into some real work. And this was great fun. So I did this in October when I got back from China. And then I took this with me and worked on it more in Connecticut, and then started doing some bigger work there. I had a little cottage and a fabulous studio all to myself for a whole month. And those 3 works on paper that are back there came from that residency. And about 3 weeks into, about the 3rd week, I decided that I would like to try to paint and see what would happen. So I started painting, and I wanted to use that same organic process where I was starting with no real idea. I was just starting with marks and kind of responding to whatever was there, and just see where that would take me. And so I did 3 paintings there. This is the only one that survived. The others I just didn't finish or resolve for one reason or another. And I was working on all different I was working on paper, I was working on canvas, I was working on panel, and the whole idea of using these different surfaces was so exciting to me. And I'd add texture to the surfaces so that it would affect how the paint went down. And so when I came back from that, I just continued painting, and then I thought I should invite Karen to the studio to see what she thought before I got too excited about it, and see if she wanted to even show it. So I only had 2 works really, and I don't think they were really even resolved when she saw them. So I'm so grateful that she had faith in me that I could deliver. She really felt that rather than filtering the new work into the gallery slowly, that it would be better to present it all as one body of work. So, so that's sort of the story. And I'll look through my notes here to see if I've forgotten anything. But if you have questions, you can start on the questions. I mean, I didn't talk about process all that much, but I can talk about process, yeah. So I think I mentioned about exploring the new surfaces. I'd never really painted on canvas. I just didn't like it. I always painted on really smooth panel. But now all of a sudden the canvas really interested me. So I was painting on unstretched canvas mostly. And I chose unstretched because I could put textures behind it and use crayon or oil stick or something to rub the texture. So I made rubbings onto the canvas. And in some cases I put gesso on the canvas but left it rough and pressed printed textures into the gesso. So I've already got something to respond to on the canvas when I start. And I mean, all of that, it was just breathtaking how excited I was about it. And I usually start with just putting some kind of mark down, whether it's you know, big swaths of brush strokes or oil sticks or something, just anything. And then from there, I just start responding to that. And I find myself just making these marks, and I don't really know why I'm making them. It's just a matter of responding to what's there, and I don't have a plan, and I find it very exciting. So some of the things I use in the painting is pencil. If you came up really close, you'll see that there's pencil in most of these oil paintings. Sometimes crayon, because it works as a resist, and so if you put the crayon down and put paint on top of it, it will resist and make some interesting marks. I have corrugated cardboard and anything that has texture to it, and I'll press that into the wet paint. And you can see some of that if you look closely. Oil sticks I love, and chopsticks for making marks. You can see that mostly in the works on paper. And then sometimes I'll just take an old painting that isn't working, and there's not usually any shortages of those in my studio. And I just take advantage of the paint that's already on there and the texture is already created to paint over it, and this is one of them. And so when I use the oil stick on top of the paint that was already there, it sort of, you know, brought forward all these textures that I just thought were really delicious and exciting. So let me just see. Some of the tools that I use are credit cards or membership cards, you know, all those things you get in the mail every other week or every other day practically. I have a whole stack of them, and you can cut them up in different shapes, and they make really nice straight lines, a straighter line than you can get with a brush. I use my fingers, put a rag on top of my finger and make finger marks. Newsprint, which I learned from my friend Kathy. If you have a thick area of paint on the canvas or on the board, if you take a piece of newsprint and press it into there, it'll pick up the excess paint, and then you can put that somewhere else on the painting. And that is really fun to do. I also use the newsprint to just, if you have a pretty loose paint, not real thick, you can sop up some of the paint with the newsprint, and that leaves behind an interesting texture too. Shelving material that they sell at TJ Maxx in the kitchen section, you know, it has little ribs in it, some of it, and some of it has, well, dots and things. The kitchen spatulas, all good stuff. So it's totally organic, building the surface, and that's what I've just become addicted to. That whole idea of not having any idea where it's going. Somehow or other, it's a little bit different feeling than when you're painting something. You know, when you're doing a painting of something, for me anyway, there's just that little bit of separation between you and the painting. And what I'm finding with this process is that I'm so in the painting that I don't even feel like there's a separation. It's like, it's really hard for me to articulate, but it's extremely satisfying. And I have a quote here from my hero, Joan Mitchell, about abstraction, and that abstract is not a style. I simply want to make a surface work. This is just a use of space and form, and that to me just sums everything up for what I'm doing. I don't have any deep down intellectual meaning to any of it. I'm just making shapes and forms, and keep working it until it works for whatever reason. I turn my panels and my canvas all the time as I'm working. There's almost nothing in this room that started off in the orientation that it's in right now. Let's see. I think that's, well, somebody said too, I read it somewhere and I can't think of where I read it, that abstract painting versus representational painting, you could say that it's, the feeling is different the way a line of poetry is compared to a line of prose. They might both be beautiful, but there's just a slightly different feeling in the two, and that's kind of what I'm feeling with the abstraction. You should always be challenging yourself, taking chances, surprising yourself. He kind of taught me to be fearless. And I think even if he doesn't like the work in here, I think he would be proud of me for that. So, I mean, I like complementary color use. I do tend to use more tertiary colors than primary colors. I almost never use primary colors. I'm kind of addicted to some special colors right out of the tube that you can't mix, like my pinks. I do love my pinks, and I would never wear pink, but I just love pink in a painting. And so it's a lot of the color that you see too is a result of sort of a glazing technique, because I like using transparent paint. And so and this one in particular has a lot of that going on. There might have been, you know, that blue-green might have been more bluish to start, and then I used a transparent indigo on top, and it just, what happens with that is it creates a luminosity that you just don't get by putting the paint down. So I don't know if that doesn't answer your question very well. I just love color, and I've grown to love gray because I think gray enhances color and it gives structure to the paintings. I think when I first started painting, I tended to use color to set up the structure of the painting, and it was just all color. And over studying with John and over the years, I've just come to realize how important gray is for creating that, you know, creating the bones in the painting, sort of. So I put just about every color paint I have on my palette at the same time, so that I don't forget that I have it, you know. I have probably 4 or 5 paintings going at once, and I used to paint wet on wet when I painted plein air, because I used to try to get it all done in one sitting, but now I don't. I'll work on a painting for a couple hours and let it sit for a day and work on another one, and to let it dry, and that enables me to get a lot of this texture on top of texture. I couldn't do that wet on wet. So that's another big change for me. I love language as much as painting, and I read a lot. I read a lot of poetry and listen to music. And so as I'm painting, if I'm listening to something and I hear a line or a combination of words that I like, I just jot it down. So I have this journal full of phrases and lines from music and poems and stuff. And then when I'm finished the paintings, I just go through that and check some off, you know, if something just seems to fit right, you know. And I just think it kind of adds to the mystery of the abstraction to have kind of interesting titles that really don't mean anything at all. The only one that means anything to me is this one, Love Burning Bright. This was actually inspired by a burning bush in Connecticut. They were out in full force when I was there in November. And when it came time to name it, I had just found out that I was going to be a grandmother for the first time. So that's why I named it that. So, because it looked like that to me. It looked like a giant Valentine. So when I'm making the marks, and I don't know, I just find myself doing them automatically in response to whatever is there. And so I'm really lost in that. I'm in the zone, sort of. And then when I stop and step away and decide it's time to let it rest and move on to another one, I can get in the same place in the next one. It's remarkable, really, because I've never been able to do that really before. I guess that's what I meant about the difference between representing something, because you're more conscious, I think, when you're making a representational painting, possibly. I really don't know. But when I look at them when they're finished, sometimes sometimes I feel like I didn't do them though. I mean, it's strange. I look at these paintings and think, wow, who did these? It's different to look at them finished and on the wall, and it's a very peculiar thing. Right, and you don't really even know what's going to happen until you make the mark, and then, you know, if it's great, it's like, wow. And then if, like this part, I do remember making this part, and I had no idea what was, because I was scraping paint on top of dry paint and rubbing it out, and I just got these patterns that were so much fun, and I couldn't redo it. That's the other problem with this process is, you know, if somebody said, how did you get that? I probably couldn't tell them exactly. So that makes every painting like a whole new adventure. You know, there's no formula, for me at least. I know a lot of abstract painters can, you know, they have probably a little more organization than that, but you know, for me, it's each one is an individual adventure and experience, and that's what I hope what the viewers get out of it, is just a unique experience. I think it's a good lesson, you know. I think a lot of us who paint, you know, we have these little voices in our heads, mostly negative talk, self-talk, you know, and we're supposed to push through that. We're supposed to fight through it and try to ignore it. And that's what I was doing. And I think in hindsight, I wasn't listening very well, because I think it was telling me that I was maybe a little bored, or I was definitely in my comfort zone. I was getting too comfortable, and I needed to spice things up. I needed to challenge myself. I think, you know, I didn't realize that until the end, but I kind of think that's kind of what it was about. And it's sort of, I think, a good lesson to painters to think about that before they. I think all the magic happens in the when you're outside your comfort zone, and it's certainly more exciting. And as an artist, you want to grow all the time, and so I wasn't really listening. I think I could have saved myself a lot of time if I'd been listening from the. Maybe it wasn't the right time. I sort of think it was probably like John Inver whispering in my ear, "You're bored. Do something different." I don't know, but it was a good lesson, because anyway. I see these as kind of experiences, you know, and so whatever way the person wants to experience it is fine with me. I had two that have gone now, but I painted them at separate times. I just happened to use the same palette and a lot of the same techniques, and I wasn't realizing how close they were together. And when I put them next to each other, after I turned them, kept turning them, in one particular orientation, they were a perfect diptych. They just, like, they went together. It was crazy. And so the person bought both of them together. Yeah. So, and he was a former collector of mine too. So, yeah, I think, you know, I think whatever people want to do with them is fine with me. But when I paint on top of an old painting that has a landscape on it, I turn it either sideways or upside down so that I'm not looking at the landscape, and I use that as a jumping off point. So it's kind of like that. But for the most part, when plein air painting, I mostly turn them just to check composition. I didn't really turn them with the intention of painting more on them. You know, I may have been missing out on that.